Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining another one of our masterclass webinars with our power panel. As you can see on the slide there, you know exactly who one of our speakers are, part of that power panel. We'll get into introducing the other folks shortly, but want to just cover a few housekeeping items as like usual. So if you're experiencing any issues while watching this webinar, please let us know using the Q&A chat. We are producing this on a web-based platform, so some connectivity issues might come up, but feel free to let us know what they are and we will help alleviate them the best we can. A couple of quick tips is just refreshing your window, exiting out of the window, and re-entering using the registration link that you had to join. We also have some resources surfaced up for you all, so feel free to check out those resources just below our window. A lot pertaining to the content that we're covering today. Also a link to Hint Hint, Jeb's new book that is based off of our topic for today, or built off of our topic for today. So definitely check that out. Excuse me. You can use the Q&A chat to let us know if you have any questions. We'll be saving time at the end to answer those questions, as well as answering them one-to-one in the Q&A piece, in the Q&A box directly to you. So you might have responses that come directly to you during the session, so keep an eye on that as well. This session is being recorded, so you will get a recording within 24 to 48 hours after we conclude today, so keep an eye on your inbox for that. And then lastly, ZoomInfo is a publicly traded company. This presentation may contain forward-looking statements. Any buying decisions you make should be made based only upon currently available products and offerings. This is our complete safe harbor statement here. We've also added it in that resource list so you can review it if you'd like to. Awesome. All right, so speakers for today, we have, like I mentioned, Jeb Blount. So he is our CEO and best-selling author, CEO of Sales Graving, as well as a best-selling author. Jeb, I'd love for you to give us a little take on, or give a little information about the new book, and I'll tell the audience what we're gonna cover today within that new book, but let us know all about it, and yeah.
Well, perfect. Well, the brand new book is called Selling in a Crisis. The book is essentially, Rebecca, sort of like a back to the basics moment for sales professionals. As we start moving into more volatile times, as we are looking at economic downturn, there are lots of headlines right now coming out of everywhere. Bad things are going to happen. We don't know how bad they're going to be, but there are going to be some bad things happening, and it's going to impact salespeople first because we're on the front lines of the economy. So the one thing that we know to be true about bad times is that in bad times, boring works, and the boring is the basics and the fundamentals of selling. And we're going to be spending a good bit of time in this session focusing on just those things.
Awesome. And then we have his partner in crime here, Will Frattini. Will, just tell us a little bit about what you've been doing here at ZoomInfo, how long you've been here, all the good stuff.
Yeah, excited to be back with Jeb and with you too, Becca. Been at ZoomInfo for about 7.5 years. I've been through a few of the downturns that have hit everybody over the last 10, 15 years while at ZoomInfo, so thankful to have the chance to help a lot of businesses push through. I love working with Jeb on talking about what is the most basic, essential truth of being a good salesperson, because it's very relevant, especially when things are weird and crazy out there in the market. And lately, I've been working with our team to evangelize one of our newest products and also our fastest ever grown revenue booked product called Marketing OS. And so it's been an absolute joy to kind of work within a startup inside of ZoomInfo all over again. And so we've been seeing a lot of success and having fun, but staying humble, because that's what the world needs us to be right now. So excited to do so.
Awesome. All right, so audience members, I'm going to give you a little reminder or refresher as to what we're talking about today. So in volatile times, like we've mentioned, it is hard to sell. It seems like every company is on a spending freeze, cutting back or pushing off making decisions. Buyers become scarce. The competition for the few that are still buying is fierce. People don't want to meet with you. Objections are harsher. Customers cancel orders and contracts on a whim and pressure you for price decreases. So yet you are still under the same pressure to make your sales number hit that quota. So in this situation, it's natural to feel stressed out or feel demotivated. So today, during this webinar, Jeb, along with Will, are going to share how to stay motivated, keep your pipeline full, increase sales, retain customers, and advance your career in times of uncertainty and change. And that is a lot for them to cover within an hour. So hang on, buckle your seatbelts, and get ready for this one. So Jeb, let's kick things off with you. I'd love for you to give us, I'm not a salesperson. I'm not on the sales floor. I know that a lot of companies are kind of in a mix of remote work versus being in the office and having that sales floor. But during a time of crisis, how is it on the sales floor? Are tensions high? What are the sellers feeling during this type of a time frame?
Unless there's something traumatic that happens, like suddenly the bottom falls out of everything, like it did back in 2020, like it did in 2008, you're typically not going to feel like some major shift on the sales floor. It kind of happens as a trickle. So Will over here is working on a big deal. He thinks he's got it closed. He's getting the contract signed, and the CEO comes in and says, you know what, we're going to hold off. We're not signing anything right now. His contact, who he's had a great relationship with him, comes to him and says, like, I'm so sorry, but my hands are tied. I'm handcuffed. We can't move forward. He gets off that call, or gets off that, that video meeting, and he goes and tells another salesperson, and the other salesperson says, uh-oh, though, that's a bad thing. Then something else happens. Then salespeople are starting to get more objections when they're asking for meetings. We're not doing anything right now. We're going to hold off. We're on a spending freeze. And it really just begins to bubble up. It's sort of an upward spiral of anxiety and stress that begins to change sales habits. Then at some point there's a downsizing, or at some point a couple of people leave and the company doesn't replace them. And that's when salespeople begin to, I'm not going to call it panic, but we begin to change our behaviors. We begin to change our mindset. It can get negative very quickly. Salespeople are known for their ability to complain. So, let's be clear about what salespeople are good at. And we're also known for our emotions. And so all of a sudden, if you're a leader, what you find is that the spirit, the soul, the culture of your sales floor has gone negative. And then that creates a negative vortex downward that can crush your sales.
For sure. Will, anything that you're feeling these days? I know that ZoomInfo, we're keeping things light. We're trying to keep ourselves focused on the right, targets and the right accounts and all of that stuff. But anything that you are seeing within, your virtual sales floor?
There's so many things out of our control, right? Everybody wants to point at something and say, why did that happen? And there's always a focus on, reacting and understanding a moment and then kind of doing something about it. I will say something that's kept us consistent through the last few years, performing and beating our expectations. Our leaders have done a really good job of translating noise down to the sales floor. Nobody's perfect. Sometimes we have a bad day, but if the leader hears, hey, we need to do more of this, or we need to get this number hit, or we need to hit this forecast better, faster out, we have a lot of leaders that know how to translate that message that they hear that's in their job description into a positive, constructive, today I'm going to focus with my team on doing one thing that they can do on every single call that impacts them. Because the one thing a sales rep doesn't need is their ego to be bruised, warranted or not. We all have big egos. But they don't need to be told that they need to hit their number. And I think that's something a lot of sales leaders really don't appreciate or understand, maybe because they didn't have that leader in their past before they became a leader. And I think it's really important that you don't edge out your sales team before your company decides that's a choice they need to make, if they do need to make it, by putting extra pressure on a salesperson who's already got a fragile ego to say you didn't do enough today. Because I bet you your best salesperson who's 300% to her plan still thinks she didn't do enough today. And so I think the best leaders at ZoomInfo, I know I've worked for a couple really great ones. I think of Kayla Prunier on our team had always made it her mission to say, the one thing I'm going to take from every meeting I have with my boss is how to translate that into an actionable play that a brand new rep in our team could go use on every single one of their next calls. And that, to your point, Jeb, the reps hear that, and then they tell each other, here's something I learned. It worked. Here's something I learned on that call. It worked. And that just permeates, especially with a remote environment where we don't have the water cooler talk, right? Those are the things that keep growing the garden and keep everybody focused, as opposed to doing the easy stuff, which is complaining. and saying, we didn't do it right today. We should do better tomorrow, right? I think that's been one of the reasons we've been able to stay so consistent. There's a lot more to do, obviously, but it's been nice to see that.
There's an umbrella on the front of this book. It's sort of the icon. All my books or covers are very similar, but that's essentially, as a sales leader, what Will was describing is you should have an umbrella, and all your salespeople are under the umbrella. So no matter what's raining, what's happening, as a leader, you're controlling the narrative, you're controlling the message, you're focusing on what you can control. And if you're a sales professional, you also have to focus on what you can control. And there's only 3 things you can control: what you choose to do, the activity that you do, how you respond to what's happening around you. So yeah, you got a deal that goes bad, pick yourself back up and go focus on the next deal. Focus on doing things right. Don't change your behavior. And you can control your mindset, what you choose to believe. And if you're a rainmaker rep, like you said, the rep that's got 300% to goal, she doesn't think she's done enough. If you're a rainmaker, that's how you think. I haven't done enough. I can do more. A rainmaker can make it rain in any environment. A rainmaker can increase sales in any environment. So if you have that mindset, I choose to be a rainmaker, you're going to be okay. If you have the mindset that you choose to be a rain barrel, you're going to sit around and wait for something to drop in, or you're going to choose to complain, or you're going to put your head in the sand. I can tell you that as we move into a volatile time, you can look around you on your sales floor, and if you're a rain barrel, you probably won't be on that team anymore. And if you see the rain barrels, they're probably not going to stick around, because in really good times, it's okay. You get away with being mediocre. You can coast along, and you're probably going to be fine in your job. But as soon as things start tightening up, the one thing that leaders don't have time for are anchors, and they're going to chunk all the anchors overboard.
Awesome. Okay, so a little bit more on that, Jeb. And a piece in your book I read was that you mentioned sellers need to be more than charm and a great personality to close sales in a crisis. What do you mean by that, and why?
Well, let's think about what we've been through for the last 18 to 24 months. What's happened is we had a pandemic, but the dip in the pandemic lasted about 30 days, the shortest recession ever. It was deep, but it was quick. And after that, it's been a good run. We've all done very, very well. Salespeople for the last 18 months to 24 months, many of them have made more money than they've ever made in their entire life. They have sold more than ever. Companies have grown at a rapid pace. My company quadrupled in revenue size. That's insane. 400% increase in the size of our company during the last 24 months. There were a lot of salespeople who could show up, and they could cut corners. They could skip the sales process. If you were in an industry that was impacted by the supply chain issues, the phone was ringing off the hook. And if you could just be a little bit nice, you could bring your charm and your gift of gab, people were buying from you. And here's what happened. You thought that was you. But there's a saying that in a bull market, don't confuse success with brains. So a lot of people were successful, and they believed that they were successful because of the things that they were doing, but it wasn't them. It was the marketplace, and the marketplace has been good to us. So now as we start shifting into a different type of a marketplace where buyers are more risk averse, buyers are going to be more intentional about the decisions that they're going to make. There's going to be scarcer resources for them to spend. So if you've got executives that are going to, and any type of decision maker that's going to put their reputation and their job on the line to buy something, they're going to need to know that there's going to be an ROI. This happens to every business everywhere, because even my business, we've had a really good run. We are tightening up. We are cutting expenses. We are looking at where we've made stupid decisions. We bought something that we didn't really use. Everything's being tested for ROI. So if you're an account manager, this is important. You need to make sure that you're demonstrating ROI. And if you're an account executive, when you're walking through the door, you've got to build a business case. Does charm matter? Yeah. Does rapport matter? Yes. Does the fact that people like you and want to do business with you matter? Absolutely. But if you walk in with that alone, you lose. You have to be able to lay out a business case that demonstrates emotional outcomes, what people get emotionally, personal outcomes, how your stakeholder is going to improve their life and their career, and measurable business outcomes. what's the ROI for doing business with you? And what I mean by you can't show up with charm and personality, you got to bring a business case to this fight, is thinking about a very simple value equation. So, because you're going to have people telling you, look, you need to go sell value, you need to sell value, you need to sell value, especially as you start getting pressure from buyers and pressure for competitors. But value is a very simple equation of emotional outcomes plus personal outcomes plus measurable business outcomes minus price. That's where value is. You've got to be able to demonstrate that. And when you do, you'll win. And when you don't, you're going to lose. Companies are not going to take a chance on you like they did before. The last 24 months, I've spent money as a business owner on things that they were kind of iffy, but I'm like, we got money coming in. Let's take a chance. Let's see if it works. I was willing to roll the dice on purchases. Not anymore. Everything is going through a vetting process, and we've said no to a lot of proposals that even 6 months, 8 months ago, I probably would have said yes to over the last 3 to 6 months.
Alrighty, so let's talk a little bit about buyer deferment objections, and how should sellers handle them during a time like a crisis or currently kind of rolling into that crisis. Jeb, I'd love for you to give us a little bit of an understanding of how they should handle that objective, being that it's a little bit more specific than just broad objectives that come up.
So the thing, objections are always going to be there. So when you go to the place where let's say that Will and I are meeting. Will's my stakeholder, and there's been a group of stakeholders, but he's the core decision maker. And I go to him, present my business case. There's always objections. He may say, this looks pretty good, but these prices are a little bit higher than your competitor. This looks really good, but I don't like these terms and conditions. This is really good, but I kind of need to work through how we're going to implement this. Those are all buying commitment objections. You're always going to get them. In an economic downturn or in a crisis situation, in volatility, where buyers are afraid, where buyers are more risk averse, more intentional, they're going to think twice about spending money, those objections are going to still be there, but your primary objections are going to shift to not right now. This sounds really good. It feels really good. I'd love to do something, but I'd like to hold off a little bit. Those type of objections are coming from a place of fear. They're coming from a place of emotion. Sometimes they're just coming from a place of, I'm overwhelmed. So I've got so many things happening. I'm trying to fix things, plug a hole here, go over there. I've got issues on my own team. When human beings get overwhelmed, they just don't make any decisions at all. We've always known that no decision is our biggest problem, our biggest cause of a closed loss deal. There's a number of books that are out right now. There's a great book out called, I think it's called The Jolt Effect. Matthew Dixon wrote that book. Fantastic book out on this. That's always been there. It just becomes a hyper problem for you in a volatile period because buyers are afraid. Let me back up, though, and explain something else about this. As we start thinking about these type of objections, so you asked me earlier, what's happening on a sales floor? What's happening on the sales floor right now is salespeople for the first time in a long time are getting those objections, and they're happening at a more frequent rate. And so what's happening right now is that salespeople are beginning to obsess over objections. Even people that are coming into this webinar, you came into the webinar because you saw, buying deferment objections. You went, oh, I want to talk about objections. You're obsessed over them. And my message to you as a sales professional is when you start thinking about buying deferment objections and what you should do, and Will's going to have some very specific things that he does when he's in these situations. But what I want to say is stop obsessing over the objection. Start obsessing over selling better. Start obsessing over discovery. Start obsessing over executing the sales process. Begin obsessing over qualifying and making sure that you're working with the right people in the right accounts at the right time. Start obsessing over that. Start obsessing over coming in with a lot type business case that is unassailable, that addresses problems that your customer is facing right now, that gives you the confidence when they begin to defer the buying decisions to put your arm around them and help them into that change, because they're going to need you to get them there because they're afraid.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We've done so many of these together. Of course, we start to think alike. I think you talk about the abundance mentality. We had so many opportunities for 18, 24 months, we as salespeople in general. And it was more about being the right vendor. Now it's really the alternative may be you or nothing. Or I don't understand why this problem that I need to go solve is important enough to solve. And I think all of those things come back to qualification. And it might sound like a cheap way to answer this question, but that's where my head always goes when I talk about helping, rebut or rebuke an objection. It doesn't happen because you have the zinger rebuttal to say to someone on their objection. Like that's really just wordplay. If you actually rebut an objection and win, you're probably in a debate where someone else is deciding who made the better case. You're probably not in a sales cycle with the other person across the table, because that would mean they were wrong and you were right. So the key is to get them to label their objection as early as possible so you can work through it before that's the end all be all of your deal. And I think back to qualification of, my first sales job. In order to work together, this is how we work. Does that fit the way you work with your vendor? Nope, never done it before. Well, that's okay, Ms. Manager. We're not a fit for each other. We'll talk to y'all soon. And I would always ruthlessly go qualify out on my first meeting because I didn't have a quantity availability of resources. And so now the market is forcing that on everybody, where if you're selling your value as a luxury or as you can get value in 6 to 12 months from now story, you're going to get the objection of, I don't know if I'm ready to wait 6 to 12 months to get that value, or I don't know if I need that thing that I've never used before. The good news about selling, and this is really important that anybody hears this the exact way I mean it, we're not here to be unethical. We're not here to sell the wrong things, making it sound like the right thing. We're not here to overpromise and way underdeliver. But if you can think about the value that you create in a way, in an economic downturn that improves efficiency, improves speed to value, improves resource capacity without resource allocation, it's hard for someone to say no to that unless they have never said yes to anything in their life. And that's something that you also want to qualify out early, because an objection from someone who can't say yes anyway is really just nothing at all, right? So I think those are the pieces that I find everybody runs into the deferment objection. I've heard one today, right before we did this webinar. I had one myself, but it's, hey, we're not a fit for everybody. And here's why people usually pick us. And here's the things that it sounds like that doesn't resonate with you for right now. And that person saying, yeah, actually, that's exactly right. Well, good. Let's shake hands and separate it. Then I get to go make a decision. Do I go execute a different play to get around that person, to the person that could have said yes? Do I come back to them with a value add that says, hey, I was thinking about this the other day, because we didn't end coming to blows. We ended on a polite term that I could come back to and say, hey, I thought about this value that we create that maybe could be helpful. How does that compare to the last 48 hours since we've talked? Would that be impactful if you had that for the full year that we were talking about all over again? And those are the pieces that allow us to get to the resolution. Again, hearing someone say, not yet, not right now. There are also tips and tricks you can employ that, if you sell a relationship deal with someone where you recognize annualized revenue, or you recognize deals on a longer term basis, and someone says, we're not going to do it now, but we'll do it in January. Hey, would it be crazy if I let your contract start now, but had the agreement officially run from January 1st as a start date? Would that change things? You're either going to, yeah, that would actually make it easier. Or no, that's not really my objection. Here's the other one. And then you go down the thread together and work it out as a team. But I think getting to that buyer deferment as early as possible, so you're not finding it out when you think you're about to sell your deal, is what's been helpful for us. And it's something we're ruthlessly focused on here with our new hire training, with our daily training that we do with our sales team, because it's the #1 deal killer in any type of value add based solution, or solution, especially when there's a lot of competition and there's kind of, maybe a reason to go with a cheaper or nothing at all alternative.
And when you're in that situation, let's say you've done everything right, you've executed the sales process, you've qualified the buying windows, you were working with decision makers, you presented a wonderful business case, and they say, gosh, we love this. We love your company, we love all these things, but we're worried about right now. We're worried about doing this today. We're a little bit afraid about what's going to happen. Can we just hold off for a couple of months? When you're in that situation, there's a couple of things you need to do. First of all, don't fight. There is nothing that you said this earlier, but there's nothing that you say that's going to argue them into feeling any different. You can't change the way that they feel about the situation. Now, you can change the shape of fear, but you can't argue them into believing that they're wrong. So the first thing I do in this situation is I go, look, I get it. It's a tough world out there. And the last thing that I want for you as a business is that you make a decision that's going to put you in a bad position, and then you're mad at me. I'm just curious, what's worrying you? And I asked that question because if there's a buying deferment and I did everything right and they're giving me buying signals, but they're giving me buying signals tomorrow, not now, what's worrying you about this? And then I just shut up and let them tell me. So they go blah, 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 blah. And then all I do in that moment is I just go, okay, tell me what else. And I'm just trying to isolate it and just try to figure out what specific fear am I dealing with? Because people almost always fear the wrong thing. So, for example, if it's ZoomInfo, if it's your world, well, they're afraid that we're going to spend money and people aren't going to use it. Or we're afraid we're going to buy this, but then the market's going to collapse on us, and then we won't be able to get an ROI at this. Okay, I get that. Then I have to go back to changing the shape of the fear, and the way that you do that is you have to minimize what they're afraid of, while you remind them of what they really wanted. So you might say, look, I totally get that you're worried that the market's going to shift on you and you're not going to get this. But let's go back to the math. When we were talking earlier, you explained to me how you guys run your pipeline. And you said that when you put a qualified lead in the pipeline, that you have a 70% probability of closing that deal. The problem that you face is that most of the deals that are coming in, they're not fully qualified because you don't have all the information, and your reps are spending an inordinate amount of time chasing down information. When we ran the demo with you in the pilot, we were able to drop that information into your pipeline, and you got an immediate 20% jump in your close rate just like that. That resulted in this much revenue. So no matter what happens in the marketplace, independent of all of that, by enriching the data in your pipeline, instantly you're going to get a 20% minimum increase in your close ratio, and that's going to deliver this much ROI. Does that make sense? Can't you see why it makes sense for us to move now versus letting all that revenue slip in the future? And then you can begin a conversation. Typically in that moment, they're either going to go, I hear you, I get you, I still got to go work with my team, think about it, whatever. Got that. You need to have a fallback in your back pocket for the next step. But if you do a good job, and you've done a good job all the way through the sales process. Now, and this doesn't work if you didn't do good discovery. If you did shallow discovery, you got no ammunition, you got nothing. All you're doing is you're just selling a price or selling a marketing brochure. But if you did that, usually one of two things will happen. They'll go, I get it, you're right, I know we need to make that decision. That is you with your arm around them, helping them make a decision they're afraid of, like a friend. But you've been there with them. You built the relationship. You went through the process with them. The other thing that'll happen is they'll begin to negotiate. And this, by the way, will happen to me just last week with a big contract that I know that we needed. I know it was important. And I was like pushing it off. And the account executive did a masterful job of keeping me engaged and getting me to the table. And she went through the process with me, and she goes like, what is it that you're afraid of? And I finally said, and it was more of an overwhelm. I'm not sure that the way that we have this configured is going to reward me if I scale. I'm afraid that it looks like it's going to be a penalty. And so I'm afraid I'm going to be too successful using your software, and then it's going to become a burden for me. And she went, oh, well, thank you for telling me that. She goes, how would you like it configured? And I said, if we did this, 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 and this, I'd feel a lot better about it. She went back and said, give me a moment. Let me go check with my team, see if I can get that done for you. She came back and she said, I can do it. We signed the contract. But by stopping and clarifying and understanding what I was afraid of, she was able to identify the fear, reshape it, and she landed. This is a 3-year, high 6-figure deal for her that I was putting off because I was having a hard time explaining to her what was causing me fear until she pulled it and put it on the table.
It's funny. I think the objection that you can overcome, whether it's deferment or if it's no decision or if it's you're too expensive, usually is a mask behind something that's actually a projected internal issue. Jebs end up being the same. I'm worried that this won't scale. It's nothing to do with the product or the company. It's more about their business. And the only thing that your customer is probably going to get convinced about is changing their perception of themselves. They're never going to believe you about your product. You're the biased salesperson. You're the one selling the dream and selling the value, really, unless they've used it for a while. Maybe you have that leg up. But especially for new business account executives and sales folks in this market that we sell in now, right? But, hey, I'm worried that this is a luxury and I just need the daily driver version. That's interesting. It sounds like you don't really trust your team a lot. Worst case scenario, no, I trust my team entirely. It's just not what they do every day. That's not the kind of thing they do. And I'm not willing to invest in a new thing I've never done with the best thing I could invest in. Okay, now we're talking. Now that's an objection. Now we're talking about a behavior. Now we're talking about a course correction. Hey, why is it that your team doesn't do this stuff? Well, they're not used to doing this stuff. Sounds like they never had to do that stuff. You're right. So why are you trying to make them do it in the first place? Pause. Well, I'm trying to make them do it because they're not getting the results I need. Interesting. So it sounds like them not doing it the way you want to isn't an option. You probably want them in the safest thing, not the daily driver from 1987. Actually, now I get it. It isn't, the days of buying an old pickup truck for your kid, right? I just went down the road of selling a pickup truck, but like that could apply to software sales. That could apply to sales training. That could apply to anything. But most buyers, this is something we talk about a lot at ZoomInfo, and this isn't meant to be a commercial for ZoomInfo, but we tend to be something that people have bought the wrong way a lot of different times from a lot of different people. But once they buy ZoomInfo, they end up buying it for life. And it's not because the new business account exec sells you on the value and the dream and the vision every year and gives you a good discount. It's because the product works and it drives results quick. But it takes a lot for someone's perception of what the product is to be broken to get to that stage of actually using it, right? It's like TSA pre-check or exercise or eating healthy. Like everybody thinks it's not for them and then they do it. They're like, why did I not do this for them, right? And hopefully everybody has the version of their product story or their outcome that they drive that they can align to that. This is a thing that I can prove to you that once it works, you're not going to leave it. Here's all the results and social proof that show that. What is it that you're worried about that's not going to be the exact same thing? Well, here's the actual problem. It has nothing to do with your product. Let's talk about that. And those are things that usually someone doesn't invest their time in talking to salespeople and going on the internet and doing a bunch of research on a product or service and having 3 or 4 phone calls only to get to a no decision. Hate to burst everybody's bubble, but they're usually buying something else. It might be cheap, it might be short term, it might be a stopgap, but nobody really wastes 4 hours of their time and 2 weeks of their time evaluating something just to be like, we're not going to do anything. They just didn't want to tell you, right? And so getting to a place where you can get past the alternative being, I go do something that I still don't even think is right, but it's a Band-Aid, right? Or I go, keep taking Tylenol every 6 hours, even though I feel like garbage, instead of going to the doctor, right? How long are you willing to do that, Ms. Buyer, before we actually get to a place where this matters enough? We haven't really talked about that. It's not really my sales style to kind of press on pain, but I know this is also one of the best times in the world to do that. And that goes back to qualifying, is getting an understanding of how long can we sustain the way that things are set up today. You told me you want to ramp up how your team drives leads. You told me your team drives a lot of leads organically and doesn't have to go prospect and doesn't do inbounds. At a certain point, is your owner going to retire and someone else tells you have to do it differently? Is that the only time it changes? Or did your owner say we might want to grow the business by 5-10% over the next 12 months? Like what does that actually look like beyond, looking for information on people to talk to? These are all different things that you and your team have to talk about ahead of time. You have to practice this stuff. You have to go through talk tracks. You have to be bought in on each other, doing this stuff together before you meet with your clients. Because if you're kind of looking for all the reasons that things are hard and be in that rain barrel bucket, you're going to not be looking for a way to keep getting better and keep controlling that locus of control, like Jeb said, right? And then when you get stuck in an objection and someone says you're a luxury, you're not a need to have, you're going to believe that. And that's going to stick inside your brain. And on your next call you have 20 minutes later, you're going to be like, maybe I do work for the wrong company. Maybe my product doesn't work. And that stuff is what actually turns into these downturns, because people stop believing in what it is that they sell. They make it inaccessible for their buyers to realize the value. I know I'm going a little off here, but one other thing I thought on earlier that you said, especially in a downturn, it's really important that sales and marketing professionals also remember that the nature of what we do is help companies do more or do better. Really, you can boil it down to that. Do more, do better. Be more efficient, get more time, whatever you want to say it. But just because we're in an economic downturn, does that mean companies don't want to do more or be better? And that's where, for me, I always find it challenging when a sales rep kind of gets stuck and gives up. Is like, did you not believe in what it was that you were selling during the good times? Because that's exactly what they should be wanting you for right now, if they're your target audience. If a company needs to make their sales team more efficient, they should need training now more than ever, right? If a company needs to engage with, really good candidates in the market, they should need recruiting help now more than ever. If they need to optimize their manufacturing process during a downturn, they should need that now more than ever. They might not be willing to talk to you and have an open-ended discovery call for 30 minutes and eat sandwiches with you every month, but those are the things that you really need to think about with your team, is how do we make our message really clear and easy to understand that there's nothing different, nothing changed, that we're the business that actually has been the one that people trust in forever. And that tends to translate into how do you sell with your buyer as well, and how do you make sure you're getting through that I might not do anything for right now objection. And I've learned a lot of that from Jeb too over the years, and I've seen it work. And that's, again, one of the things we've been lucky to be able to lean on here at ZoomInfo.
That's awesome. I'd like us to shift a little bit into kind of understanding, now we have seen this happen over the last couple of years, but I think during a crisis, we might see a little bit more of this, is how to handle evolving a buyer committee, constantly evolving buyer committee. And I don't necessarily mean just, over time it's evolved, but even in that buying cycle, your sales cycle, that buying committee is evolving. So Jeb, do you go around, or actually, let me toss this to Will. Do you go around your initial buyer if you're not seeing things turn out or respond? You mentioned a little bit of this earlier. And if you do, when do you do that? When is the right time to not disrupt your sales cycle? Because that, potentially that initial buyer was potentially a buyer, but things have changed within the organization. I think there's a lot of things that have evolved with buying committees, but I'd love for us to kind of take a little bit of a layer on this look.
Yeah, so I think the question is, like, when the person you're talking to can't make the decision, how aggressively or how directly do you call that out? I think that's okay.
Sorry, exactly.
No, I appreciate you. I just want, because for other folks that might not be ever used to that before, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe people never really had a buying committee to even deal with, or didn't even think that was a thing. We've always kind of had that at ZoomInfo, where there's usually not one person, unless they're the CEO of a small business that we were talking to. We've always subscribed to, you need the 6.5 decision makers to get a decision over the line mentality. It's in the DNA of our marketing. It's how we engage with buyers in the sales process. However, the longer you perpetuate the dream with that person, that they could be the person, and again, perpetuate is my word, maybe I'll even say enable that person to think they're the person, the harder it is to go around them. And then you become the bad guy or the bad gal, right? And so it's imperative, and now in today's economic condition, it is mandatory to include the most senior person over the team that's making the decision before they are ready to sign off. And if you get a deal through to signature without the person signing the deal, and you've never met or talked to that person before, just go buy a lottery ticket that day, because it's very rare and you're very lucky, and there's nothing more or less to it than that. I heard of a deal recently where there were think it was 7 or 8 stakeholders and about 5 to 10 other sub-stakeholders involved in an evaluation. Legal process was negotiated, and the person they needed approval from was called out during the sales process to that sales team, and that person apparently approved everything, budget, otherwise, legal was done, and the deal got held up because the executive finally raised their hand and was like, I don't really know if I'm interested in this anymore. I don't really know if the price of the timing is right. Really vague, really broad stroke objection that candidly was probably just a savvy negotiation thing, meaning they didn't need to do it the second. But can you imagine how many resources were put into a deal where that many people on their end were involved? And those are the things that we have to make this. If I'm going to go around you, Mr. Manager, it's because I'm trying to save you time. I'm an expert at selling my solution. I do it for a living. I can't expect you to try and sell this to your team better than I can. And it's not because I have an ego, it's because I want you to go get it. So if you believe in the value of this thing and you believe that I'm going to help your business, let's work together to go and have these names already off the top of your tongue. Johnny, Larry, and Sally identified. Which ones of them should we be talking to? And you gauge their reaction in that moment. Johnny, Larry, and Sally, do you already know them? No, I don't. I've never met them. The internet's a wonderful thing, though. I also have ZoomInfo. I'm interested. The last time you went and asked for them to approve something unplanned, what did that look like? How did that go? Who did you have to talk to that you didn't even know you needed to talk to? They might tell you, hey, look, Johnny, Larry, and Sally are part-time retirees who keep the titles so that they can maintain a tax benefit on their business, but I make all the decisions myself. I've approved every single investment we've made over the last 2 years. I have my own budget. Nobody asked me a question under $250,000. Let's rock and roll. Okay, we can do a deal together. But if you're not calling that out with them, and then you're waiting until after to go around them, even if you're right, and even if the big boss comes out and says, yeah, I'm the one that has to sign the deal, most of the time it's gonna be like, hey man, really? You went around Susie to get to me when Susie was trying to get the deal done? Like, Susie was really excited to get this deal done. She never got anything approved before, and this was her first big shot. Now you ruined it. So bugger off, we'll call you in next quarter, right? So it is one of the most advanced, how do I finesse that dance with my buyer? But you have to do it on the very first call. If you have a sense, a doubt, anything, that is not the person that can sign. And that's very easily determined by their title, by their tenure in a company. You can usually get that ahead of time. You can see on the internet, ZoomInfo, anywhere else, who are the other people. So you have people ready to name drop, so you're not being weird after the fact. But those conversations have to happen now more than ever if they're not happening in your business, because I bet you they're all talking about you if you're not talking to them.
I'm getting some T-shirts made. I'm gonna put them on the Sales Gravy store that just on the back just says "bugger off." So, I love that. Will makes wonderful points. It's learning how to ask questions. So, for example, Will says, the last time you had to go get approval for something that was out of cycle, how did you do that? The one question you don't want to ask is, are you the decision maker? That question is going to get you nowhere, because first of all, you're going to put the person in a bad position where they have to tell you they're not important to say they're not the decision maker. So they're more likely to lie to you, and you're not going to get all the information. The other problem is that they may not know that they're not the decision maker anymore. So as the economy begins to go downward, the decision making is most typically going to shift upward, because when you become more risk averse, you want your executives making those decisions. So suddenly the person who used to make the decisions, it was okay. This has already happened in my business, by the way. People in the middle of my business who are allowed to make decisions right now can't make those decisions. It's CFO level. Every buying decision has to get signed off by the CFO, even mine, by the way, and I'm the CEO. So everybody's got to go through CFO. So they don't know anymore. And so as you start thinking about that, think about the questions that you're asking in qualification. That was like when you had to go get a decision made the last time you were in this situation, how did that work? The last time you bought a product like this, what was the process that you used as an organization? How many people are typically on your team when you sit down to put together a group to evaluate something like this? Think about open-ended questions that compel them to walk you through their buying map. And then as you start doing that, as Will said, you begin to map that stakeholder group. ZoomInfo. I've got ZoomInfo too, so I use it to map stakeholder groups. And in understanding how that group works, one thing I would say, especially in a volatile time, is don't trust that the stakeholder group actually has any power. Will said this, there's an executive somewhere else who goes, you know what, that was great. I'm glad y'all spent some time doing that, but we're not doing it. And by the way, I've been that executive from time to time. And sometimes that's because I wasn't even involved. I feel a little bit offended that no one brought me in and even asked me my opinion and got me working on it with them. The other thing you might want to think about, and this is true in some cases, this won't be true in other cases, especially in business services, it may be true, especially if you're working in SMB. There used to be a buying committee. There isn't a buying committee anymore. There are people down there that think they're the buying committee, but the CEO of the small business is making this call. So you've got to go up. And now more than ever, if you want to close business, you absolutely must be dealing with people who can say yes and sign on the dotted line and fund the deal. And if you're not talking with those people, as Will said, you're rolling the dice and you're taking a massive chance. And that wasn't true 8 months ago or 6 months ago. You could easily go sell to people who were not the final decision maker, and they would happily go advocate for you with their executives, and you would get sign off on things because there wasn't that much risk. Now, those people will tell you they'll do that, but they won't even go do that because they don't want to put their neck on the line and be the person who's spending money when they're cutting everything else. So this becomes a critical pivot point for you in your qualification of your deals initially. And then, Will, I think you made this point brilliantly. You never take your foot off that accelerator. You are always asking that question until the moment that you got ink on paper or digital ink on paper, because you could be blindsided at the last minute if you're not asking the question about what's going to happen next. Like I always say, like, you and I make an agreement, Will, what happens next? That's one of my favorite questions to figure out what's going to be going on once I get a verbal yes.
And again, it's about them. Do you know how frustrating it is to be one of those 15 people that spent all their time? I mean, the story I heard was that they already told their teams, dozens of people, that they bought the thing because it was through legal. What was going to happen? So it's important to make sure that you say, you might think I'm biased. You might think this is about me. You might think because I'm some salesperson that's got a number to hit and a commission to make. This is me sharing how this usually goes. And now I've seen it firsthand in this current condition. Your C-level executive may possibly even be offended if they're not involved in this decision. How are you going to handle that? Notice I'm not asking to have that conversation. I'm making it their idea, right? This isn't psychology tricks in that, but you got to make it their idea. Hey, when you present this internally and your boss who needs to authorize it, who hasn't been a part of any of this stuff, hears about this for the first time, sees what you're asking for and sees a dollar tag next to it, what's going to happen? Well, they're going to want to know this, and that. Okay, stop. Would it be crazy to say the fact that they even want to know anything more than where they sign, that you should probably involve them in some of the conversations you've had so that you don't spend all this time going through the motions and then only to find out that they weren't totally ready to move forward? That's an interesting idea. It's not my idea. I'm asking you. You know your team. You know how y'all buy things. Did you do it that way the last time? No, I've never done it that way. Why haven't you done it that way? Well, they trust me to make decisions. Okay. Let's keep proceeding ahead then. In that case, you don't want to self-sabotage your pipeline. That's the other thing with qualifying out, right, Jeff? I mean, it's like you don't want to look for all the reasons to cut the hamstrings out of your deals, but walk them to the finish line. I think on all these webinars, I probably always plug my old mentor, Susan Verano. I say, she would say, at the finish line, at the table where we're getting our relationship started, right? The finish line of your evaluation, but the beginning of our partnership, we're signing the deal, we're moving forward. This is how I want you to be thinking. Is that what you're thinking? Well, I don't even know if we're there yet. All right, we are not ready to move this thing forward yet because we don't know what that table looks like and that start of our relationship looks like together. Help me understand where we missed, what we can align on, who else needs to support, what are the reasons that they might not be ready. And we've had some great successes of that where we had big time naysayers of, we had a sales and marketing team at a nonprofit a couple months ago. Be like, these two IT leaders, they see through all the sales nonsense. They're going to tell you all the reasons you can't. Hey, bring them to a call. Really? Oh yeah, we'd love to meet with them. 20-minute, 30-minute call, went through everything they needed. At the end of the call, they're like, I don't know why we didn't do this a while ago. These guys are great. Let's do it. And we got it through. But we didn't know that ahead of time. We would have been just another statistic where the IT team would have said, no, these are all the same. Throw them out. That's not going to happen. Yep. And you're never going to know unless you ask.
Will, you said something important there that I don't want to lose, and that is when you're having a conversation with them, it's okay to be transparent and say, things have changed a lot. The economy is not what it was before. And I'm noticing that a lot of my customers are changing the way that they're buying. How has the changes in the economy impacted the way your organization is approving spend right now? So just be talk about it. There's nothing wrong with that. And like you said, I love what you said. It's not my call. I'm just asking them. I'm putting it in their plate. They don't want to spend that time either. And I'll add one thing to this is when you do have a group of people together, do not assume that they're talking to each other. Do not assume that they're communicating with each other. You need to take on that role because especially during an economic crisis, you cannot leave anything to chance.
For sure. I think there's, even as a buyer, all of what you're saying is completely true. When I'm purchasing, I've got 2, now 3 levels above me that need to go through approval. And so me then turning to, I know what I want this product or what service to do for me. But at the same time, you have to prove that. And the sellers are the reps that I'm working with. They're the ones that are talking about this day in and day out with a variety of folks. And so you really, as a buyer, have to figure out a way to, kind of put the sales piece out of your head and trust them as a trusted advisor. If you really want that product or platform or service or whatever it is, to know that they're going to be able to sell it better than you will, because that's their job. And if you really want that product as a buyer, you want to make sure that they're doing the selling and not you, because that's not necessarily your job unless you're a seller being sold to. But I think that's as a buyer, me being able to turn then to my director, my VP, my CMO and say, hey, I need this tool. Here's why. A little, write-up is not always going to be enough for them. They're going to need to be involved in those calls. Maybe not all the way up the chain, but at least the next level or 2 up, potentially. All right, so let's wrap up. We had a lot that we covered. I think we're going to have to do a part 2 of this, maybe starting next year. But I'd love for us to end. And Jeb, you mentioned a little bit about this in the beginning, talking about rainmakers, talking about the bucket, all of that. But I'd like to wrap up on just like any tips or advice you would give to a seller that's wanting to protect and advance their career during a time of crisis. Any tips or advice around that?
Yeah. My number one piece of advice is be indispensable. So you've got to show up every day and cause your leaders and your company to be in a situation where they can never imagine not having you there. Yep. And that means that you are doing the activity. In an economic crisis, when things are going down, when you're in the middle of a time of scarcity, economic winter, you might be doing a lot of activity and not getting a lot of results. But activity is tangible. They can see that you were making the calls. They can see that you were doing the work. They can see that you were putting opportunities in the pipeline. They can see that you were asking for help and that you were working deals. If you're not doing any activity, you're gone. Go help the boss. Go be a part of your sales meetings. Be a mentor to the other people on your team. Be a bright light on the sales floor that people are looking for. When everybody else is negative, you never ever complain. You look at it and you're as optimistic as you possibly can be. And by the way, when we think about complaining is essentially misery's mating call. And when you look at all of the rain barrels in your team, like they want you on the team with them. They want you to be miserable with them. You're the person that says, I can make it rain. I can get this done. You come in early, you stay late. And I'm going to give you one really good piece of advice because there's a lot of Gen Zs out there. Don't get mad at me. This is not an ageism thing. I'm just telling you the truth. There's a lot of Gen Zs that don't get this because you haven't learned it. But in a crisis, whatever your boss is interested in, that's what you need to be interested in. And I don't care what it is. And by the way, if your boss is at work, you should probably be at work too. because in a crisis, there is no mercy for anchors. There is no mercy for someone who's not producing and people that aren't contributing to the organization. And when people see you with the mindset, my job is to protect my company, my job is to protect the people around me, my job is to go out and make sure that I'm contributing every single thing that I possibly can, when heads roll, and they will roll, you're not going to be with them. You're going to be valued, and you're going to come out on the other end, and you're going to be someone that people, really trust and really believe in as part of the team. And you'll probably make a lot of money doing it. And I've made a lot of money in crisis situations because all of the incompetence and the mediocrity gets wiped out of the marketplace. And suddenly, instead of people taking away little chips and pieces of the revenue pie, there's a much bigger pie out there that I can get a piece of. And I'll leave you with one more core piece of advice, and that is get back to the fundamentals and basics of selling. That is really what these crisis situations are about. That's what they're for. They're to teach us that there are building blocks that make sales work. Go back, watch these webinars that ZoomInfo puts on, because you'll find those basic building blocks there. And it reminds us that stop doing stupid things, stop doing silly things, get back to being serious about being a professional. And when you do that, everything's going to be perfectly okay. You're going to be fine. And by the way, you're going to be the person that leads your company and leads the economy out of this on the other side. The cycle will renew. We'll be back into a time of abundance, and we'll get to do silly things again.
I can't say anything different, better than what Jeb just said. It's a what have you done for me lately kind of world. Don't write the headlines and the articles, and don't self-promote yourself. Be the one they write those headlines about. Be the best person at your job that you're in. Go put up good results, good numbers for your team. Be the person that everybody asks how you're doing, what you're doing, and everything will be fine. But it might feel tempting to go and self-promote and figure out a way to stand out and be more present and visible. Promise you the best thing you can go do is be the best at the job that you're in today. And don't go writing headlines. Let them write headlines about yourself. I give that quote credit to our literal #1 sales guy, Carl. I always said, why don't you speak up more about what you do? He's like, man, I'm like the 04 Patriots. I'd rather people write the headlines about me than write them myself. So that's the stuff you got to do right now. Everything that Jeb said, and everything will be fine. Everything will be fine. It always ends up being, even though it's hard to believe. And that's a lot of what's in this thing right here. And a lot of it is probably in your own company. Just go find that best salesperson that's been there longest, probably your CEO, probably your head of product marketing, and go figure out what those stories are that they want you telling. And that will make it even better too.
Awesome. All right. Well, this was wonderful. A lot of great information in here. I know we went very long on this, so anybody that stayed, I really appreciate you all being here. You will receive the recording of this within 48 hours after we conclude today, so keep an eye on your inbox for that. Some resources, a link to being able to purchase the new book will all be in that email as well. Thank you, Jeb. Thank you, Will. As always, I think this is our last one for the year, so I appreciate you both. And we will definitely be in talk soon, more to come. And when Jeb did mention that we've done a lot of these webinars in the past, check out the ZoomInfo website and go to the resource list, resource center. In there, you'll be able to see a variety of webinars that we've done with Jeb over the years. I think it's going on 3 years now. So with Will as well. So definitely check those out. Let us know if there's any other topics or content in the survey that pops up at the end of this that we feel like we should dive more into. And we will see you all at the next one. Thanks again, everybody.